without further ado, Mr. Darrell Heckman. Thank you.
This program today is inspired by and dedicated to a former St. Paris resident, Charles Foster Jones, and his wife, Etta. Because the vast majority of what I'm going to talk about them pertains to their time in Alaska, we're going to start and get a little subset based on that. So I got to get a couple of things. Start off with, how many of you have been to Alaska? We'll get a little audience participation here. Okay, so, and whereabouts? Whereabouts in Alaska did you go?
Denali.
Anybody been to Denali?
Yes. Yes.
Juneau? Those that have been, would you recommend it for other people?
Yes. Yes.
I would too. Been 3 times. Never went till 2007, but been 3 times since then. Has anybody been to the Aleutian Islands, however? We're going to talk a little bit about Alaska, like I said, as background, and just get started, even though obviously there's a Champaign County connection here. All right, logically and supposedly, Alaska is the first part of the New World to be inhabited by humans. Makes sense. You know, the New World was empty, and as you know, they called the so-called land bridge Beringia after Bering, the Bering Strait. You know, whether there was or wasn't Beringia, I mean, people could have gone over by boat. For heaven's sakes, they went all the way from Asia to Hawaii by boat, so they certainly could have gone the 30 or 40 miles that the Bering Strait is now. But there was a landmass. So they think Alaska was first occupied by humans about 15,000 years ago. Now, it's really not that surprising, as remote as it is, that Alaska was colonized by Russia. And again, Vitus Bering was the explorer. He was actually a Danish explorer who flew under the Russian flag and claimed what we now know as Alaska for Russia. They saw that it was going to be difficult to maintain that area. They really only had one city in Alaska to speak of, and that was Sitka. Sitka was the first city in Alaska, and it was the capital then. And it's still a fascinating place. There's still some Russian influence there, primarily by the fact that the Russian Orthodox Church is still a major component out there. As far as people speaking Russian, that's almost non-existent. I mean, they teach it in Sitka High School, I think, as a historical thing, but most of the people in the Russian Orthodox Church are natives, as a matter of fact. As we know, Russia felt that it was going to be difficult to maintain Alaska, and their big concern was that not that the United States would get it, but that Britain might get Alaska, because Britain had Canada. So, you know, again, we plan these things, and who knows what it's going to be like 100 years later. But the Russians felt it would be smarter for them to sell to the less powerful United States than to the more powerful Great Britain. So we bought the land for 2 cents an acre. And even at that price, there was a lot of controversy as to whether this was a good deal or not. Okay, and so, yeah, I don't mind the audience participation here. So the Secretary of State that was involved was Mr. William Seward, and so purchase of Alaska was called Seward's. Right, okay, and so we've all heard that, but I heard they also called it Walrussia, which I thought I had not heard that one before. So they paid $7.2 million, or 2 cents an acre roughly, for Alaska. And don't quote me on this, but I've read and have come to believe that the .2 was really a bribe. to somebody. I think it was supposed to be 7 million, and somebody in Russia got another 200,000 to make sure that the deal went through. At any rate, the United States obtained title to Alaska in 1867. And that's interesting. I mean, the population was tiny in those days. I mean, even when Alaska was admitted to the Union on January 3rd, 1959, the population was only 250,000 people. Now it's about 750,000 people, and about half of them live in the greater Anchorage area. Anchorage has become a big city. Now we're dealing with a lot of people of my generation. Who remembers when Alaska got admitted to the Union? I was in Cub Scouts. Yeah, it was a big deal. And I think part of the controversy was there were some senators, especially from the South, that didn't want 2 more northern senators. I think that was what held it up for a while. Because the momentum for Alaska statehood really started, like so many other things, right after World War II. So it took 13 years for it to come to fruition. Originally, Alaska, being so small, wasn't actually granted territorial status till 1912. Prior to that, it was just sort of this like a military base, a 560,000 square mile military base. The military ran it, basically. That was who the government, the governing body was the military. But in 1912, it got territorial status. The capital was moved from Sitka to Juneau, where it remains. Yeah. I was watching Amos and Andy when I was a little kid. And they were on a quiz show. The joke was, so the question was, what's the capital of Alaska? So Amos turns to Andy and says, I don't know, you know? And they said, that's right. And by the way, now, those that have been to Alaska, who's been to Juneau? Yeah. Amazing city. It goes from sea level to 2,000 or 3,000 feet within a mile of the ocean. We took a tram up there, and I just couldn't believe it. And as government grows and grows and grows, Juneau and Fairbanks are now fighting it out for the second largest city in Alaska. But like I said, Anchorage is by far the largest. Okay, so that gives us a lot of background on Alaska. Oh, well, I'd be remiss if I didn't go over the map a little. So I've got a lot of state maps in my collection. This is one. Notice it's even bigger than the average state map. This is most of the non-Aleutian Alaska, and you can just see, how huge it is. The Aleutians themselves are about 1,000 miles long. The westernmost island in the Aleutians is Attu, which we will be talking about today. And it's about 1,000 miles from Attu to Anchorage. 1,000 miles. And there's one congressman for the whole state still. So that is by far the largest congressional district in the country. When we get to the Attu part, I'll flip it over and show you the Aleutians. Okay, so what does this have to do with Champaign County? We start with Caleb Jones. Caleb Jones was a pretty prominent person in St. Paris. He was a doctor and he was a pharmacist. Strangely enough, I saw them refer to him as a druggist. Anybody heard that? I haven't heard that word in 20 or 30 years. I think it sounds too much like drug dealer, so nobody says druggist anymore. But he was a physician and a pharmacist. He was chairman of the board of the Farmers and Merchants Telephone Company in St. Paris. Another aside, years ago I gave a speech about the lynching that happened here in 1896, and the lawyer in Dayton had the telephone number 43. So, I don't know how many phones there were when Caleb Jones was around, but he died in 1924, so I think he got in on the bottom level. He also ran an ahead of its time treatment center for alcoholism. It was called supposedly the St. Paris Institute for Treatment of Sobriety and Drug Addiction. I think that should probably be for insobriety, but that was supposedly what the name of it was. But that was I don't, if anybody knows where that might have been in St. Paris, I'd be interested in knowing. I don't know. But Dr. Jones died in 1924, and he's buried in St. Paris. He had 7 children by 2 wives. The youngest child of his first wife was Charles Foster Jones, who's the subject of this talk, and who went by Foster. Just a few months after his birth, his mother died, and Dr. Jones remarried. And not much is really known or said about Foster's childhood, or other than that his father was supposedly a demanding person, but he was obviously a very successful person as well. But where things start getting interesting are Foster's born in 1879, and when he becomes a young man, it's either 1897 or 1898, he decides he's going to go out west. So he goes to the Seattle area, and he enrolls in Puget Sound University, which still exists. But he wasn't there very long when he really got the bug and decided, I'm going to Alaska. Of course, this is when the gold rush is starting, 1898, 1899. And so Foster goes off to Alaska. He never returned to St. Paris. He only returned to the lower 48 once for the rest of his life, and that was to go to Seattle to get supplies. So for the next 20 years, we think he's a subsistence gold miner. Not a whole lot's known about him. But magic strikes when he's 42 years old. In 1922, he meets 2 young women. They're from New Jersey, and they're out there. The one woman is actually temporarily living in Alaska, but he meets her sister Etta, and they fall in love and get married. Each of them 42 years old, first and only marriage. So Etta, like so many other people, was a school teacher, and they had what must have been the predecessor to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or something akin to that. I mean, people needed school teachers. And how many school teachers are there in Alaska? Not very many. So that's what happened. Etta becomes a school teacher, and she gets assigned by whatever this agency is, and I think it may have been actually called the Bureau of Indian Affairs at the time. Of course, remember, Alaska is not a state yet, so it would be mostly federal kind of stuff. So she gets assigned, and Charles is a guy. He's a real handyman. He can make radios. He can repair stuff. I mean, you can't call a repairman when you live in some of these places in Alaska. So he was very handy, and he also got in with the Weather Service, what we now call as NOAA, National Oceanographic, I used to know the words, Administration, NOAA. And this is kind of interesting because they would the Weather Service would have some people stationed all throughout the country, and then they would have to report 4 times a day on what's the weather here. And of course, we know that the weather trends from west to east because of the way the Earth tilts on its axis. So the weather in Alaska today is the weather in the Yukon tomorrow, and in Chicago the day after tomorrow. So it's kind of a precursor to coming weather, rather than the other way around. So they get assigned to a place called Old Harbor, Alaska, which is down here on Kodiak Island. By the way, Kodiak Island is the 2nd largest island in the United States. The only one that's bigger is the island of Hawaii. The city of Kodiak is decent size by Alaska standards, 3,000 or 4,000 people. But Old Harbor was maybe 300-400 people. And they were stationed there, and I think they liked it. And that's still a fairly active area. Then they got reassigned to a place called Kupnik. It's over here. And even today, there's only about 300 people in Kupnik. And that's about how many there people were in Old Harbor, but at least it was on, well, it was on a place that had some other cities that weren't too far away. So they got assigned to Kupnik, and they were there and, you know, did the various stories and travails and so forth. And from there, they next get assigned to Attu. So, bear with me. I'll turn the map over. Even a map this big can't show all of Alaska. So I told you the Aleutians are about 1,000 miles long. Yeah. Oh yeah, I'll just give you some more tape. And I'll put it up to the top here. Well, maybe that'll hold. All right, I think that's going to hold for as long as we need it. Okay, so again, you see here this just incredible archipelago of the Aleutian Islands. If you superimposed Alaska on the United States and Ketchikan, which is the bottom of the panhandle, if that were in Jacksonville, Florida, Attu would be in San Francisco. That's how big this state is. That's how vast it is. And so Attu is the westernmost island in the Alaskan archipelago. At the time that Charles and Etta Jones were sent out there, the population was about 45. So 43 natives and Charles and Etta. And Charles, again, is running the radio, and he's running the communications, and he's saying what the weather is, literally first in the United States. In fact, and I'm sure a lot of you know how the international dateline sort of goes at an angle. Attu is actually about 173 degrees east latitude. We've passed west latitude, you know, it stops. Ordinarily, the international dateline goes right where 180 east and 180 west meet, but it's all the way over there. So they get sent to Attu, and it is called various things depending on the kind of personality and cheerfulness and life you have. It's been referred to as paradise by Etta Jones, and it's also been referred to as the lonesomest place outside of hell. I tend to go with the second one myself. Their weather is pretty much like it is today, you know, 40 degrees and raining, like 300 days a year. They didn't really have any agriculture, although they had enough agriculture that like wild berries would grow there. So there were, and of course it's an island, so the people could eat fish. And the only real animal of any size they had were foxes. And these foxes had good pelts, and so the people, they didn't even have guns for the most part. Almost nobody had a gun, but they had set out traps, and they'd trap the foxes, and then they'd split all the money that they got from selling the fox pelts among the 43 people, and life is good. Well, now we're going to get to where life's not so good. We all know that World War II begins for the United States on December 7th, 1941, despite the fact that they go on for 2 years prior to that for other countries. And while Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, they never occupied Japan. But for whatever reason, be it strategic or be it psychological or be it something else, the Japanese decided that they would invade Alaska. And part of Alaska that they invaded, logically, was Attu. Not because it had any particularly great military value, but because it was the closest part of the United States to Japan, and it was kind of, I mean, how are you going to defend it with 43 people, you know? So, sure enough, on June 7th, 1942, the natives come running into Charles and Etta and say, "Oh my gosh, the Japanese are attacking." And as remote as this place is, and there's no cell phones, and there's no cable, and there's none of that stuff, but there is a radio. And Charles has the radio. And he wires to the US government in Dutch Harbor and other places. The Japanese are invading. They're invading Attu. They're coming now. I'm not making this up. And unlike Pearl Harbor, that is accepted. They understand it and they realize that Attu is being attacked. So the Japanese arrive. Well, there's 43 people defending. There's 1,000 Japanese soldiers. There's not going to, I mean, it would be insane to have resisted. So there was no resistance, but the Japanese then came in. They came up to St. Paris native Charles Foster Jones, and they said, he destroys his radio when he sees them coming so that they can't use it. And they tell him, fix that radio. And he says, no. And they killed him, right on the spot. And they brought his wife in, and they made up some story about what happened, but then they beheaded him right in front of her. Yeah. So the 40 Indians that, when I say Indian, you know what I mean, natives, the Aleuts, let's call them Aleuts. Aleuts and Mrs. Jones are taken to Japan. And we don't know what happened to the Aleuts. I think most of them probably died. But Mrs. Jones is taken to Japan, and she's put in with some Australian women that the Japanese also had captured, because, you know, this was a multi-front war, obviously. So she is interned with several Japanese, with Australian women for the duration of the war. And at the end of the war, she is liberated. She made it through the war. She is liberated, and to their credit, the Bureau of Indian Affairs decides that she's entitled to back pay for all the years that she was a POW, which in 1945 dollars was $7,371, which is a pretty decent little nest egg. Not that it was worth it, it wasn't. By the way, my father was a POW in World War II, and he got 2 years back pay also. So they were good about that. So Mrs. Jones was liberated, and she came back to the lower 48, retired to Florida, never went back to Alaska, and lived to be 86 years old. A couple more things. There's a book that is about all this. That is one of my sources. I've had several sources for this thing. Letters from Attu. This is a book written by a lady named Mary Brew, who is a relative, distant relative of Etta Jones. The book is available in the St. Parish Library. I checked it out. I read it. I liked it. I recommend it. If you don't have a St. Parish Library card and you want to check it out, you can get it through the interlibrary loan here in Urbana. I recommend it. It was a fascinating book. And I have a couple of bookmarks. And if you want to get the book and you can't remember the name of it, you can take the bookmark. So if you want to check it out. But it's well worth reading. So another thing that happened, and again, how many people are from the St. Paris area? Anybody live near St. Paris? Okay. Well, you know, the Pony Wagon, they've got their museum too. And Mr. Jones was the only member of the Weather Service to be killed in World War II as a civilian member of the Weather Service. So there was a presentation in 2017. And probably, I didn't hear of it, and probably none of you did either, but they came out to the St. Paris Pony Wagon Museum, and they gave a plaque to him as the only person to have died working for the Weather Service during World War II. Mr. Jones still had relatives living in St. Paris at the time. Donald Jones was his nephew. I don't know if any of you knew him. He has since died since 2017. I talked to one or two of the relatives, but it's a nice plaque. I'd asked them if they could bring it over today, but I don't know if any of you know, Dale Thornton kind of runs the St. Paris Museum, and he had a stroke recently, and I figured he wasn't going to be able to bring it over. I'm sorry, I wanted to have that plaque here, but if you want to take a look at it, you can see what it looks like here. If you ever go to the Pony Wagon Museum, you want to look at that. Now, there was even a claim that Mr. Jones was the only civilian killed in World War II on U.S. soil by foreign. I don't know if that's true. I mean, you know, there was the thing in Oregon where they did the bombing, and of course there's Pearl Harbor. I don't know if there were any. But the Battle of Attu was the last time that American territory has been conquered, however temporarily, by a foreign force. So I need to talk a little bit about the Battle of Attu. Now, as I said, it was June 7th of 42 is when the Japanese take over the island for whatever it's worth. Attu's...
I'm gonna move that laptop so you don't have to type it.
Okay, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. Watch carefully.
Yep. Thank you. Sorry about that.
So Attu's like the 23rd largest island in the U.S. It's about 3,000 square miles or so. But again, it had just minimal people. But again, whether for strategic or symbolic reasons, and I think the latter may be predominant, the U.S. decided, this is our country, this is our territory, we're getting it back. And the conquest started June 7th of 42. In 43, the U.S. had a forced armed landing to recapture Attu, and it was bloody. There were 549 U.S. killed, supposedly 2,351 Japanese killed, including suicides, and it is said that the casualty rate at the Battle of Attu for the U.S. troops was 25%. Casualty, as I understand it, means either dead or injured so badly you can't continue fighting. And that was the second highest casualty rate of any battle in World War II, second only to Iwo Jima. So it was a very bloody, bloody event. Attu continued as there was a naval station there for a while, but as of 2010, it has a population of 0. So it's the largest uninhabited island in the U.S. now. There's nobody there, and I have to tell you this part. I know some of you know a good friend of mine, Rich Meyer, and he's a big bird watcher. All right, for bird watchers, a really big deal for them is their American list. How many birds they see in the U.S.? There's some strange birds out in Attu. And occasionally they'll get Russian birds that are flying off course. So I've talked to Rich about it. He says, oh yeah, you know, to really be a good birder, you got to go to Attu. And if any of you have seen the movie The Big Year with Steve Martin, they go to Attu. And I said, okay, Rich, you know, we go to Aspen and we go skiing, and then you go to the ski lodge for the après ski. I said, what's the après bird like in Attu? He said it wasn't much. But I think you can still go out there on a tour boat if you want to go catch the Russian hawks or whatever. But I had to bring that up. I do want to refer to some of my sources. It's kind of the last thing here. Oh, yeah. In addition to Charles doing the gold rush, it is claimed, and I have to say claimed, that he was involved in the original Iditarod. The Serum Run, and so let's review that just real quickly to look it up in the Wikipedia, and I printed it out here. The Serum Run was 1925, so this is perfect. You know, Charles is there. He's just been married 2 years. As we all, you know, again, I had to refresh my memory, so I'll refresh yours. The Serum Run actually was diphtheria vaccine. That was the disease. Everybody says, yeah, there was a disease in normal. It was diphtheria. And they had a few cases, but they probably had more than they knew about because the natives had a habit of burying their young without telling anybody that even died. So they had to get this diphtheria serum, And planes were in their infancy, and the weather was, it was a horrible winter, 50 degrees below zero all during the original, we call it Iditarod now, I mean, that wasn't what they called it then, they just called it the serum run at that time. But it went from a town called Nenana, Alaska, which was kind of like the northern trailhead of the railroad. So it makes sense, that's as far as, hey, listen, don't take it by dog sled if you can take it by rail. So take it as far as we can on rail, and then from there to Nome, it was by sled. So supposedly, Charles had one leg of the Iditarod. However, according to Wikipedia, the list of all the people that were running in the Iditarod, his name isn't listed there. So he probably did it. I mean, why would he say he did if he didn't? And he certainly would have been. There weren't that many people that could do that sort of thing at that time. So we're giving Foster another dingleberry, another credit for running the Iditarod. The St. Paris paper had a couple articles about who did what. They had an article in 1946 about Mrs. Jones being released from the prison in Yokohama. I forget what the paper was. Yeah, the St. Paris News Dispatch was what it was called back in those days. And we all know there's false information, and unfortunately, in 1943, the St. Paris paper also said that someone had received a letter saying that Charles was a prisoner in Japan and doing well. Well, obviously he wasn't a prisoner in Japan doing well. He was beheaded by the Japanese on Attu. Oh, and then I ran across another really great article. I showed you the picture of the weather plaque. So there's a little short article there from a thing called the National Cooperative Observer from NOAA. Might want to take a look at it. But a guy from the Alaska News did I thought a really nice article called "The Lone Civilian, One Alaska War Hero's Unique Place in History." And so Charles, the natives, if they didn't revere, they certainly respected him, and they just buried him right on Attu. And he was entitled to a military burial, and his remains have been removed to Elmendorf Air Force Base, Richardson Base in the Anchorage area. So he's one of the very, very few people that doesn't have his rank on there because he wasn't a member of the service, but he was buried at the military, reburied at a military cemetery. So that's the presentation. Like I said, I have a bunch of stuff up here. I'd be happy to take any questions either now or privately. If anybody want to have any questions now? Okay, well then the program is concluded.